In this video, I want to share some inspiration with you, and some questions of aesthetics are going to be covered that are going to be crucial to making things interesting and playing the game here that I'm asking you to play about pushing aesthetics, not confusing just pointing and clicking with your software with the actual act of designing. I want to start just by mentioning a mentor of mine. First, just to talk about a field of study that relates to his work and our problems in being designers. Consider this basil camouflage. You could think of it as disruptive camouflage. It's not the kind of camouflage where something is intended to be hidden to confuse the gunners, to make it unclear as to which direction the ship's traveling, where it is, how many there are. Notice the faceted quality. That's an illusion based on these Gestalt principles of grouping and the convexity expectation. Are these intended to be beautiful designs? No, they are serving a purpose of confusing the eye. So as designers, we have a choice about how are we going to attract attention. Well, we need to do something beyond just simply presenting the information. We need to present it in a way that interests the eye but doesn't overwhelm the eye. I want to share a graph that Roy Behrens has created that puts a fine point on some of the problems that we're trying to solve. Down the center, we have what we're shooting for, which we'll call aesthetic form or optimal experience. We have an axis, a continuum. On this side of the graph, we have formal monotony. What is an example of that? Well, Ad Reinhardt painted a painting that was all black, and that's a good example of one that's monotone, monotonous. Behrens argues that that's hypo-arousing, meaning there's little information, not enough information to get you to pay attention, and therefore anesthetic. The viewer might enter into a kind of a trance, so to speak, a meditative trance. On the other extreme on this continuum, we have formal mayhem. Too much information, hyper-arousal, a different type of trance, but similarly anesthetizing. So either extreme, too much and too little, you could say is not helpful when it comes to trying to sell a product or get attention to a particular problem or to advertise a show, etc. Have you ever thought of aesthetic and anesthetic as opposites? I hadn't before I saw this chart. So we need to focus on creating form that arrests the attention of people, not puts them to sleep or numbs them to the point where they might forget. Look what we have down the center here. Almost seems like oxymorons. Harmonious disarray. Well, in this video, I want to take the grid idea further and show you some methods that both contain this concept of unity in diversity and what you could say is harmonious disarray. The first system. Anybody come across that in a class you've been in? Yeah.
I use it. I learned about it like when I was in photography club in high school, but mostly I use it for photography and most of my poster making.
What does it guide you to do?
Usually for like where to place important visual elements. So like to put it in like the intersection points, to increase visual appeal, or like putting text in those areas.
When you create a spatial relationship, you've got it echoed. So this amount of space is half as much as that amount of space. So that halfway point in any given interval is a special place where our brain finds equilibrium. The central axis has a gravity to it, a magnetism. And this is about defying that to a degree, but still maintaining that harmony so that all the parts that are created, the negative spaces, have a relationship with the rest of the composition. They echo and are found throughout the composition. So we see that all the time in design dialogues about the grid system and how that's a way to create a predictable rhythm to harmonize those spaces, not all of which are made so obvious, but it's a more of a subtle strategy. And in that you will always find a discussion of this, this particular proportional distinction that is related but different in a very fundamental way. Who's seen this before? Who knows about the golden section? Where'd you come across that, Ruben?
Also in photography.
How does it relate to harmony?
It guides the eye in an interesting way that's not just like what you were saying with like centralized portrait, just glance and then you see the subject immediately. Mm-hmm. Kind of, it brings your eye throughout the whole frame.
Notice what each of these shapes are. They're all squares. So there's the logic, there's the repetition, there's the thing, the motif that is repeated throughout. But notice how they're not the same size. None of them are the same size. Square, 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 square. Think about how a square is a fundamental sort of irreducible element that has a harmony unto itself. So you take that same element and you repeat it, okay, with a grid system. But here's a non-grid grid system that has a logic to the way it arranges itself. Where we see it constantly being used is in Greek architecture. Everywhere else we look, that includes accurate representation of natural forms. I Googled Fibonacci, and up comes all these images of this same kind of thing. So there's a thing called the Fibonacci sequence that he discovered, and it seeds in, say, a sunflower in the different rows. And he found that same number in the pine cones, and he found that same number all around nature. It relates again to a kind of a harmony, a predictable but lively, lifelike growth rate that relates to the way things build each other. Like a plant will accrue another layer, a shell will accrue another layer. And so it's a very matter-of-fact way these things just happen. Does anybody know the first number in the Fibonacci sequence? 0. Who knows the next number in the Fibonacci sequence?
1.
1. Okay, now's when the fun begins. Who knows how you determine the next number?
You have to add the number, like the numbers before.
Right. So what is the next number?
1.
1. Right. But then it's 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so on. And in those numbers at first are infinitely different, then the same, and then 0.5, but then 0.67, they eventually approach the exact same number that is described by the golden section. Look at this ratio here. This kind of defines the beauty of this thing. You've got a unit, which is this end to this end, which is subdivided according to this ratio. And try to wrap your brain around this. B is to A, size-wise, as A is to the whole. It's a system for Gestalt, a system for a unity of form. And while I don't mean to say, follow a system and you will be successful, I kind of do. I kind of mean stick to a system. It can be any other system that you pick, but this particular one has a secret weapon in that it's logarithmic, meaning it's constant but changing. So do you remember that that graph I showed you of the anesthetic versus aesthetic? This falls directly in that position of being the same but different, or harmoniously disarrayed, so to speak. So when you're trying to figure out places to put things, just maybe you'll go back like a lot of people do and find one of these graphics even, and that's kind of the cliche of what not to do. I won't make fun of you for that. I think you'll probably find a way to breathe life into your work if you do try that. I don't mean to make you have a crutch, but crutches are useful for people that are limping, right? So if you're stuck and you're feeling like you can't figure out a way to breathe life into your design, consider a system of harmony that you've not explored yet.